Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I do have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Today we are doing a four-part special into the life and death of, nonetheless, Marilyn Monroe. Was her death an overdose? Was it more? Let me know what you think by the end of the special. What you think her death was. So, She was it was Marilyn Monroe. She was beautiful, glamorous, but doomed. She was Hollywood's most vibrant star who died suddenly at the age of 36. She was found dead in her bed August 5th, 1962 in her LA home, apparently due to a barbiturate overdose. Her death was officially ruled a probable suicide. She slipped into a coma after taking too many sleeping pills, but many fans thought it might have been an accident overdose. More conspiracy theories about her demise have never entirely evaporated, though. Plenty of people to this day are willing to believe that she was murdered and that the Kennedys might have had something to do with it. Um, with with it, especially since she had a supposedly affair with both Presidents JFK and his brother, Senator Robert Kennedy. But it's all bunk. The coroner ruled at the time that she had too many barbiturates and in her body for it to have been an accident. She had overdosed before she suffered sharp mood swings, and the LA County's DA's office reviewed the case in 1982 but found no evidence to support any theories and backed the findings of the original investigation. Now, first, I'm going to talk about her three husbands. I'm also going to talk about her family and do an overview and everything, just of her life and her career in general. And then part two, I will go into more details as well as three and four as well. But you might know her second husband, Joe DiMaggio. You also might know, but her first husband is not well known. You know, her third husband is also well known, though, Arthur Miller. From 1942 to 1946, she was married to James Doherty, who went by Jim. And at this point in time, Marilyn had not been considered Marilyn yet. Her name was Norma Jean Baker. Norma Jean was a merchant marine, um, and James Doherty were in Avalon, Santa Catalina Island around 1942. And I wonder if this. Now, I really do wonder, like, is this in relation to Shannon Doherty? I am very curious if that's the case. If anyone knows, please let me know. But that would be a very interesting connection to have right there. But the LAPD policeman James Doherty was Monroe's first husband. On June 19, 1942, she would marry Doherty, who was then 21 and she was 16. And Squanny Cruggs, producer of the documentary Marilyn's Man about Dirty, spoke to NPR about their relationship in 2005 after his death at the age of 2001. They met at Van Nuys High School in California. He was born Vivian, great sense of humor, and he brought that out in her. But the reason she married him at such a young age was part of her back to her upbringing. Her mom, Gladys Baker, was institutionalized for mental health, as both her maternal grandparents were too. Per the New York Times, she was also spent time as an orphanage. And when she was 7, Grace McKee, Gladys's friend, was appointed her legal guardian, and assuming responsibility through Monroe's continued to live in foster homes and orphanages. A biographer of Monroe's predicament said that McKean announced she and her husband were moving to West Virginia and could not take Norma Jean with them. She offered Norma Jean a choice. She married a young man Grace had selected, or she'll have to return to an orphanage. She chose to get married. According to her biography, um, Donald Spotto characterized the early phase of their relationship as 16-year-old Norma Jean tried to rise to the unrealistic demands of being a suitable housewife for a 21-year-old independent man. She asked few questions, accepting one of the sexual companions and housekeeper conjoined her on her by grace and now expected of her by Dorothy. Spotto also quoted at Marilyn as saying, "My marriage didn't make me sad, but it didn't make me happy. My husband and I hardly spoke to each other, and this was because we were angry. We had nothing to say. And she was dying of boredom." Doherty was stationed overseas with the Merchant Marines from 1944 to 1946, per NPR. And at the time, Monroe's modeling career was just getting started. At 20, Monroe filed for divorce in 1946. And that same year, she signed a studio contract with 20th Century Fox Studios, per The Many Lives of Marilyn Monroe by Sarah Churchwell. In 1997, Doherty wrote a book called To Norma Jean with Love. The second of her husbands is probably the most well known. From 1954 to 1955, she would be married to baseball player Joe DiMaggio. In 1954, she married her second husband, who was a former New York Yankees player. And by that time, DiMaggio had been retired for 3 years. And Monroe was a famous actor, with Gentlemen's Preferred Blonde and How to Marry a Millionaire. In Spotto's biography, Monroe recalled meeting DiMaggio for the first time in 1952, when she was 25 and he was 37. The meeting was arranged by DiMaggio after he saw a picture of her and wanted to meet her. They had little in common, and DiMaggio had no interest in movies, and Monroe had never been to a baseball game. But Spotto quotes Monroe in their conversation saying, "I expected a flashy New York sports type, and instead I met a reserved guy who didn't make a pass at me right away. I had dinner with him every night for 2 weeks, and he treated me like something special." He also pointed out a big difference, as DiMaggio told her there could be no better career than a wife and a mother when was she not consider retiring, so they could have a family and a private life. And according to Spotto, Monroe said she wasn't ready, but said raising a family was her fondest dream. And after 2 years of dating, Monroe and DiMaggio decided to get married. In her 1960 memoir, My Story, Monroe said that she talked about her marriage with DiMaggio for months, and they both knew it wouldn't be an easy marriage. The wedding, too, took place on January 14, 1954, in a small ceremony in San Francisco City Hall. It was short-lived, as a major fight would come when Monroe was filming The 7-Year Hitch. In this famous scene, Monroe was on a subgate crate, and air sends her skirt cynically into the air, and Monroe filed for divorce in 1954. In a handwritten letter to Monroe from DiMaggio, written after the divorce, it went, "Don't know what your thoughts about me are, but I can tell you that I love you sincerely, way deep in my heart, irregardless of anything." Now, her third husband was, it was believed she actually had a child with this husband who she had a miscarriage with. But the third of her husbands was her last husband from 1956 to 1961. She married Arthur Miller. Monroe's longest marriage was to the crucible playwright, and they met in 1951, according to The Genius and the Goddess, a book about their relationship. When they met, she was insecure enough and and little known model, an actress, and by the time she married him, she was become glamorous star whose image was known around the world. Jeffrey Masters wrote, and Masters said that they would wrote letters over the years, and that they were most likely an unlikely couple. Yet, on their first meeting, and they have formed an emotional bond. That the letters would show feelings for each other, such as saying, "It is just that I believe I should really die if I ever lost you." It is as if we were born the same morning, when no other life had existed on this earth. And at this time in his life, Miller wrote in Time Bibs in his 1987 biography, "I no longer knew what I wanted. Certainly not to end my marriage, but the thought of putting Marilyn out of my life was unbearable." Miller didn't end up getting a divorce until 1956, and that same year he married Monroe in a courtroom in White Plains, New York. She was 30, he was 40. Their bond did hit a few roadblocks, though. In England, while filming The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier, in 1957, Monroe came across notes from Miller had written about her. Monroe summarized that Miller had written to Lee and Paula Strasberg, in Anthony Summers' book Goddess, that he thought I was some sort of angel, but now he guessed he was wrong. That his first wife had let him down, but I had something worse. In 1960, a couple's relationship would take a turn for the worse when Monroe began working on her film The Misfits, which was written by Miller. And on set, Monroe and Miller had a hard time working together. According to Vanity Fair, Monroe wrote in her diary, "I feel hopeless. I I think I hate it here because there is no love here anymore." To the New York Times, Rebecca Miller, Arthur Miller's daughter, guessed as to what went wrong. They would not match. They tried and they just bungled it. She was the rose and he was definitely the gardener. But he's more of a rose and he needed a gardener. People can only play the other part so long, she said. Monroe and Miller ended up getting a divorce in 1961. In 1962, he married his third wife, Ange Morris, and they stayed together until his death in 2002. Marilyn Monroe's final interview is The Heartbreaker, published in Life magazine on August 3rd, 1962, just a few days before the actress died of a barbiturate overdose at the age of 36. And felt Monroe reflecting on her celebrity status, alternately thoughtful, frank, and witty. "And when you're famous, you just kind of run into a human nature of a raw kind of way," she said as she observed. She it stirs up envy, fame does, in people who run into your life. Well, who is she? Who is she? And who does she think she is? Marilyn Monroe. Now I wanted to talk about another thing before we dive heavily into her early life and childhood. The topic is mental health. I think by understanding this, you will get an insight into her childhood and her life. Monroe, she is a cultural icon, and she still captures the interest to many to this day. Marilyn Monroe was a stage personality, but that we all knew. But who was Norma Jean Baker? Why is this important? And she launched to fame in her early and why did she how did she launch to fame in her early 50s? Well, in the early 50s. Was she mad? Did she have the same genetic makeup as her mom? Marilyn was born to her single mom, Norma Jean Mortensen, and never knew her father. She also dropped out of high school to get married to a young man who lived next door. Her life diverted when a photographer went to the factory that she worked at a shoot of wartime laborers and discovered her. She soon launched into a modeling career, which she successfully parlayed into a film, and ultimately global celebrity. Norma Jean was not the happy one. Her home life was not a happy one. Her mom suffered from a mental illness severe enough to land her into a mental hospital, and young Norma Jean lived in a variety of foster settings, including an orphanage. Her high school marriage was an escape, a chance for a semblance of stability. But once she found fame, Norma Jean divorced her tradition-minded husband and became the new Marilyn Monroe. The press hounded Marilyn. Influential gossips columnist Hilda Hopper once wrote about following Marilyn's miscarriage. Have you a complex about losing babies? You lost two unborn children, one in 1958 and the other in 1959. Is that true that in sorrow you would put vodka into your Boleyn? Marilyn, don't drink. It won't bring back the baby. Marilyn was attacked, tracked, and harassed. Her relationship was analyzed under a microscope, as well as fluctuated weight and fashion choices. Elton John famously called her a candle in the wind. The recent Netflix film Blonde gives us an insight and gives us what director Andrew Dominic rightly calls a horror film. And he wanted to present a more absolute onslaught, and we get a 2.5 hour shocking sense of rape, physical abuse, and mental cruelty. What you have to wonder how Marilyn made it all the way to 36 after watching the film. One wonders whether Blonde got it right, and that this Marilyn is hardly self-directed. She is more the perpetual victim. New Yorkers, Richard Brody called the film ridiculously vulgar. The story of Monroe, as if I don't even want to know what that was. Anyway, as if it would channel through Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ. Brody writes notes that onto the film omits her politics, acting technique, and studies, and most of her non-romantic relationships, as he had it, and we don't get much into her struggles with mental illness. Dr. Hyman Engelberg, one of her doctors, later told the interviewer, "We know that she was a manic depressive, which we know now is bipolar." Um, Biographer Lois Banner said that Marilyn suffered from a severe stutter and dyslexia, too, and was addicted to barbiturates and amphetamines. And she would be known to hearing voices as well, and she attempted suicide on numerous occasions, before finally succeeding in 1962. Monroe worked hard to overcome her mental illness. She saw a psychiatrist 5 times a week and was following one experience of her suicidal ideation, committed briefly to the Payne Whitley Clinic, and then went on to a mental ward at Columbia Presbyterian. She hated Whitney, and it felt like she was a prisoner of a crime she didn't commit. Here she was shorn of new clothes and locked in a room, forced to listen to unbearable screams of patients. Time magazine referenced her nervous breakdown and used this episode for praise of shedding a light on mental illness and the treatment for it, even though she had no such desire. The Marilyn we see as Marilyn we want is we see as Marilyn we want to see. She could be an exemplar of beauty, a gifted actress, a mindless blonde, or a brave hero, a tortured victim, a drug addict, or a mental illness sufferer, depending on how you look at it. It is important that also we recognize that as we are looking for and what it means to discussing her. The movie Blonde gives us a victim, perhaps the one we fear we may become in this world. The film leaves a great deal in its liberties, and we get a great deal that was not Marilyn. So who was she? Perhaps Perhaps we should be thinking of it like her struggles with mental illness, and we could see different, less under, a different, less understood image. Perhaps in this marriage, some people have expected solace. And one thing that I really want to talk about for this first part is her father. Um, did we did she ever meet her biological father? Well, her mom Gladys reportedly told her that her father was a famous movie star, and for years no one knew the true story. But that didn't stop fans and researchers from trying to guess his true identity. The general consensus usually settled on one person, and that man was Charles Stanley Guilford. But that theory wasn't proven until 2022. Okay, so, but who is her father? Who is Charles Stanley Guilford, and did the two ever meet? And here's what we know. We know that Marilyn was born Norma Jean to a 26-year-old Gladys Baker on June 1st, 2026. Marilyn was put into foster care when she was just 2 weeks old, but Gladys visited her over the visits. She also gained full custody of her daughter, but was diagnosed with schizophrenia and struggled with symptoms of eating disorder. For a long time, no one knew who Marilyn's father was, but the theories abounded. What did Gladys tell Marilyn about her father? Well, at one point, Gladys told Marilyn that her father was one of her coworkers and her superior at RKO Studios, a man named Charles Stanley Guilford. And Gladys got pregnant while working for Charles, and it was reported that Gladys showed Marilyn a framed photo of a man and told her that's who her father was. Gladys's one-time husband, Martin Edward Murchison, is listed as Marilyn's father on her birth certificate, but Murchison's separation timeline with Gladys suggests he's likely did he likely didn't father her. In 2022, a scientist will perform a DNA test on a strand of Marilyn's hair and cheek swab from from one of Charles's great grandchildren, who confirmed that Charles was indeed her father. So, who was Charles Stanley Guilford? Well, Guilford was born in 1898 in Newport, Rhode Island, and he died in California in 1965. Aside from Marilyn, Charles fathered two children with his wife, whom he married in 1919 and later divorced. He worked as a supervisor at RKO Studios, and Marilyn wrote her own book that he lived in the same apartment building as they did. Did she ever meet him? Well, it's not totally clear if Marilyn knew her father, but she did manage to track Charles Stanley Guilford down at one point. And according to Theo's book, Marilyn Monroe, The Private Life of a Public Icon. And the book details on how she sought out Guilford and told him who she was. And only for him to respond with, "I'm married, I have a family, I don't have anything to say to you. Call my lawyer." Man. So, who was Marilyn Monroe's makeup artist? Charles's grandfather, Francine Guilford Deer, claims that Marilyn Celebrate tried to meet up with her father in the 1950s, and that she was already when she was already famous. Marilyn went on to see her grandfather in Hemet, California, but he refused to see her. The Daily Mail that said that several of Marilyn's friends recalled the star's numerous attempts to connect with Guilford, suggesting that she had been spoken to him in person at one point. But each attempted visit she left disappointed. Over the years, Marilyn told different stories about whether she had met him, or met him in prison. Marilyn's friends reflected on the effect Guilford's rejection had on her, saying that it did not do her any good, it broke her heart. I can only imagine. And he died 3 years after Marilyn passed away. According to her biography, she had two half siblings from her mom, Jackie and Bernice, who lived with Gladys, his ex-husband. Jackie died of kidney disease at the age of 12 in biography wrote. And Charles is also had two children, according to Ancestry.com. And as a result, Marilyn has at least one living niece and other living family members through her father's other children. Which that's pretty cool though. Imagine like being well it's not cool that her father didn't want to see her and all that, but imagine finding out that I'm related to Marilyn Monroe. But that's it for part one. Come back for part two and I will talk about normal Jean, the mental health, her childhood, and her career.